An attendant rolls a cart down a warehouse aisle in San Francisco. The cluttered shelves are lined with gloves used in the diamond heist, molars of murder victims, the severed finger of a carjacking suspect. It's all evidence. The proof that something, at some point in place, happened. That is, if it doesn't get lost in the process.
The evidence warehouse is this hodgepodge of shelves and rooms and buckets where all of these things are stored. And to actually track all these things, you have a bunch of barcodes on them. And very typically, these barcodes are being scanned with a serial scanner that is tied into a laptop, and that laptop has to be plugged into the wall, and you're on top of a ladder. So it's a really dangerous thing. You'd expect like, oh, couldn't you just use a smartphone to scan all these different things? And that's actually what Mark43 does. We just have a little smartphone app that scans it. So a big departure there.
That's Matt Polega. He's the co-founder of Mark43, a New York City startup determined to overhaul outdated tech in the public safety industry. The issues with archaic technology and disorganization aren't just a matter of preference. It has real-world implications in how evidence is processed and prosecuted.
For example, there's a million stories that if you just Google it, a million stories about rape kits and rape testing kits and sexual assault kits being lost in the course of just trying to maintain a chain of custody and getting those things tested. And technology isn't helping that situation. So there's a lot of important things that end up getting just kind of sucked into the black hole of evidence warehouses.
Just outside that black hole is the decisive line that divides justice and injustice.
Who's going to jail and who isn't.
I'm Doug Frazier, and this is What We Do, where we'll meet the people behind the most intriguing passions, hobbies, and jobs around the world. First responder tech is famously dated for sure, especially police tech. How far behind is it really?
I think the layperson would say that looks like it probably came out maybe in the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, there are these pretty clunky point-and-click applications with just a ton of fields, a ton of tabs, no good error reporting, no good validation, no real thought to any user experience or user design, good patterns and principles to actually help the user work through whatever they're doing.
Mark43's tech expands to 3 fields: records management, like evidence warehouses, dispatch information, and analytics. It may seem like a niche field, but it's far from it. They've raised over $77 million in funding from some pretty big names, like Ashton Kutcher, Goldman Sachs, and Jeff Bezos. Their ever-evolving tech is now used in over 70 agencies nationwide, with many more to come. But what does it mean for the future of first responders and the victims they're sworn to help? Let's look at the curious case of Pokemon Go.
Pikachu?
When the smartphone game Pokemon Go was released a few years ago, it spurred a worldwide craze.
We're back now with something that may explain any odd behavior you've seen on the streets recently. The smash hit mobile game app Pokemon Go has only been out for a few days, but it's already got millions following their smartphones to the most random places.
The app uses your phone's GPS and camera to bring you to real locations to collect items and spot Pokemon.
People would be walking around in parks and they would hold their phone up and they would be looking through their phone to see the screen and try to catch Pokemon. I never played it, so I don't really know how it works, but that's my sense. So you're walking around looking for these Pokemon through your phone, right? There was just a rash of snatch and grab burglaries. So people would run up to some poor hapless person playing Pokemon Go. They would rip away their $1,000 iPhone and they'd sprint away.
Things like that happen every day, and it's a difficult crime to solve because the victims don't have much information to report. Most of the time, they don't get a good look at the thief. All they can say is someone stole their phone and offer a sparse description of clothing. This was happening in different cities, but different jurisdictions don't typically share data, so the perpetrators had the edge.
Data sharing in public safety right now, amongst police especially, is not very good. You would expect that 2 neighboring jurisdictions would share information back and forth about people who are committing crimes and people who are getting victimized. That is not the case. And I think that's something that's probably surprising to most lay people that don't exist and that don't work in this industry. But with Mark43, because everybody is using the same application on the same code base, the databases for all these agencies are the same, so it makes translating information back and forth really, really easy. one police officer was talking to his other police officer friend from a different agency about, hey, you know what? There's been these snatch and grab robberies that have been happening with people playing Pokemon Go, and they were basically able to collaborate as two departments working together hand in hand to solve this problem together. We think there is still a huge, exciting chapter in policing for data sharing to play a much bigger role than it is right now. And despite it being about a silly video game application, Pokemon Go on a phone, it was a great opportunity for two agencies to work together, share information, and get a kind of total picture of crime that was happening, rather than them operating in their own bubble and not being aware of what may have been going on otherwise.
So software nowadays, we have facial recognition, we have item recognition. You can look at your dogs on your phone, whatever it may be. Can we use that sort of technology with previously solved crimes to help solve new crimes, using that sort of pattern of evidence? Great question.
So Mark43's official stance on this is that we don't do any of the Minority Report, pre-crime, crime prediction, any of that scary stuff. We want the users actually making those decisions. That being said, we are surfacing way more information than the user has had previously. So what may have been a very challenging decision for them to make, 3 years ago when they didn't have Mark43, now that they have Mark43, they have every single bit of data that could possibly influence the decision that they want to make, or where they want to deploy units, or understand kind of how crime is changing in the area of operation. That being said, there are some really impressive things that things like machine learning and artificial intelligence can do. I think the public safety community has a lot of work to do in actually figuring out what it means to use things for facial recognition effectively and actually get utility out of that without sacrificing a lot of privacy of the people that you may be either surveilling or tracking, within your city or however these agencies decide to deploy it. But again, I think that's 20 or 30 years out. There's a lot of work to be done there. Okay. But with artificial intelligence, with machine learning, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that I think public safety agencies could really appreciate right now. So for example, if there was a crime that was solved and there was a photo taken of something that happened over the course of that event happening, and you saw that the perpetrator, you couldn't actually make out their face, you couldn't actually recognize who it was, but you did know that maybe they had a purple umbrella with them, or maybe they had a pair of unique Air Jordans. Computer vision is something that's a big deal right now, and that kind of goes in all this, facial recognition stuff. You could use easily existing technologies to scan those shoes, scan those umbrellas, go look through every other single report that may have a picture that matches purple umbrella or Air Jordans, and return all of those different reports to the detective. And you could say, oh, you know what? Joe Johnson was actually the person that had these shoes and had this umbrella in a bunch of previous events. Now we can actually put two and two together and say, maybe this is actually the person that committed the crime that just happened.
It seems, just as you were kind of telling that story, that purchase records like credit cards and things like that could play a role into that if police officers are able to get faster warrants for that sort of thing, actually connect in that technology. Is that a possibility as well, or is that sort of borderline infringing on people's rights?
There's a group we work with called Measure. There's a group we work with called the American Society of Evidence-Based Policing that are thinking really hard about all of these problems. By and large, privacy is important to us. Departments also and agencies also really are the experts when it comes to this stuff. So we definitely do defer to them when they want to actually integrate with one of these applications.
As technology advances all around us, the line between personal information and shared data blurs. The rise of connectivity has ushered in the downfall of privacy. It's a darker truth that Mark43 and other tech companies must navigate every day. But it's also creating a safer world where first responders can help save lives with the push of a button. As police eventually get into more smart cars like Teslas, how do you see the Mark43 software integrating through windshield heads-up displays and things like that?
Smart dispatch is something we're really excited about. So instead of having a dispatcher have to look at a map and say, okay, let's see where these different units are, because I know that somebody's been stabbed and I have to find a unit that has a trauma kit aboard, and I have to find a unit that speaks Spanish because the victim only speaks Spanish. Mark43 will be able to someday be able to say, okay, we know that this event exists and we know automatically that these units are in the area. We could communicate with a Tesla car with their autopilot and say, automatically dispatch this car, drive safely to the unit, and then you basically speed up the process of emergency response. And then the dispatcher, instead of them having to be kind of a cartographer and figure out exactly where to navigate and who has to go where and managing all of these things, they get to more be the eye in the sky and say, okay, I get to keep my unit safe, I get to check in on them, and we're going to let the computers do the heavy lifting of deploying our fleet and making sure they go where they need to go and reducing the response time for all these units getting to the scenes of emergencies.
Is there any talk of actually automating the officers themselves, for example, through robotics?
There's a whole spectrum of academia and philosophy on this part, but really when it gets down to it, when a crime happens, the most important thing that happens at that crime is that you have a human being there to assess what happened and recount what they experienced and what transpired at that particular offense or emergency or whatever thing the officer responded to. And that's important because when you go to court, you need that officer testifying to what they saw. I mean, that's a very foundational part of how justice plays out in this country and in a lot of places around the world. That being said, I think there's smaller use cases where if you need to deploy a drone to get to some sort of area that is experiencing some sort of violent outbreak or there's some sort of mass emergency, there's a lot of easy ways to be able to deploy units and vehicles and things like that automatically. They're autonomous, that could get there much more quickly than maybe just a person or police officer could. But by and large, we think that police officers and firefighters and these people and these humans, they're going to be part of emergency response forever. We don't see that changing.
Though it's exciting to think about the possibilities technology will play, a major step in revolutionizing first responder tech won't be found in the tales of RoboCop or Minority Report. It's helping first responders do their jobs better by getting back to basics, with technologies that create greater cross-departmental communication, deeper analysis for dispatch, improved organization of evidence, and simplified paperwork. Things like
writing reports. It seems like a very simple thing, but most applications right now are just kind of, they look like PDFs that you just fill in like a fillable PDF, but that makes it really hard to pull data out of that stuff and actually get insights from how many carjackings happened in your precinct in the last month.
This automation is actually able to sort of take away the brain drain on the job for a lot of people's different jobs. Do you think that in the example of police officers here, that taking those extra tasks away allows them to focus more on the compassion side, the emotional awareness side of their job?
Absolutely. The first part is that police officers and firefighters and emergency medical personnel and dispatchers and all these people that signed up to do public safety and to protect communities in the first place, they don't want to be in a report writing room writing down and filling in fields and doing all this administrative. That's not what they signed up for. So at a very base case, more technology, reducing this brain drain, as you call it, which I think is a great way to phrase it. It lets all of these first responders get back in the field and do what they signed up for. So from the community perspective, that's a great thing.
So people who would make the argument that tech actually pushes police away from the community, you would argue that it pushes them toward it.
From the perspective of transparency and from the perspective of getting these first responders back in the field, absolutely pushes them towards it. It's only going to yield good things for the community members. Records management doesn't sound like the most, crazy, exciting, wild thing. Everybody wants to go build a photo sharing application. Everybody wants to go build a social network. The things that seem like they're the most boring problems are actually the things that are most deserving of our attention.
Within every first responder is a hero. Unfortunately, most of their sidekicks are outdated technologies that complicate their duties. Ambulances take longer to arrive because dispatch is chained to archaic navigation systems. Evidence warehouses lose decisive clues because of poor record management. Every year in the US, 40% of murder cases go unsolved, and only 1/3 of rapes are ever cleared, which means an offender is charged but may not even be convicted. Improved first responder technology can help not only have a higher solve rate for future cases, but can also help detectives streamline efforts to figure out previously unsolvable crimes.
If you're as lucky as we have been to find a problem that actually goes way farther and more deeper down than just writing offense reports, and the community member that maybe just lost a member of their family due to gun violence or something like that, and you can actually touch all of those people. It all filters back up to what we thought was just another kind of boring problem that needed solving, but was actually something so much more. People should go out and find those things that they consider boring and actually put some brain cycles against them, because those are typically the most rewarding problems to solve.
This episode was produced prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, Mark43 has created a pandemic preparedness package, of which they're donating a 1-year subscription to all U.S. public safety agencies. To learn more, visit mark43.com/pandemic package. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. Would you mind leaving a rating and review for the show? It only takes a moment and it's a huge help. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. Until next time, stay curious. What We Do is produced by me, Doug Frazier, for WHRO Public Media.